Hello, welcome to Seen and Heard with Dr. Cathy Weald, a podcast series which explores the life and stories of ex-boarders and how they have fared since leaving school. Whether we've had a positive, good, or bad and negative experience of school, everyone has a story to tell. And one thing's for sure, the past has a way of shaping us into the people we are today. Now, Seen and Heard is a committed group of ex-boarding school pupils who understand the unique institutional experience of being raised in these environments and who believe in the power of connection and its ability to heal. I'm an ex-boarder myself, and I've documented my own story of recovery in a book called Unshackled Mind, a doctor's story of trauma, liberation and healing. But today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Angela Raffle. Angela, welcome. And would you like to start by telling us what you're doing now?
Thank you, Cathy. So I'm like you, I'm a medic, and I specialise in public health. Got my consultant job in Bristol in 1990. I've never deliberately changed my job since, but I've been reorganised many, many times and worked in different spheres. I've wound down a bit. I only continue to do some work for the Department of Health and some for the University of Bristol. And
Great.
That's me.
Excellent. And what about your personal life? You're living at home, obviously.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say? Are you on your own or with somebody? Or
I'm in a long and happy marriage. I have 4 absolutely wonderful children. One
Right.
absolutely gorgeous 2-year-old grandchild, and another one on the way. And I am very involved in ecological activism. And the other thing that keeps me busy is through my activism work, I recognise the value of methods of problem solving that go beyond words and enable you to shortcut into tapping into intuition, embodied knowledge, emotional knowledge. And I help teach on courses about what's called systemic embodied mapping. And sometimes we do constellations as well, which is sometimes a much misused term, but they're awesome methods. They really are.
Good. So, when did you realise boarding school was an issue? And why is it good to speak out about it?
That's really important, Cathy. I think I left the boarding school when I was 15. I think I literally closed a door in it. And I never went back there in my mind. Not ever. Until I got an invitation on probably in 2014 from classmates saying, "Do you want to come back to school? We're having a reunion." And my instinctive reaction was, absolutely not. Thank God I've got relatives visiting that weekend. I've got cast iron excuse. And though I did go back, I think some years later when, and that was really interesting. It satisfied my curiosity about the school. It reminded me how much I'd loved all the other girls. It was just the school and the nuns I didn't like. But it never occurred to me that it had affected me. And it wasn't until we were running a workshop at an organic community-owned farm that I helped run about resilience, because it's so hard running projects like that. And I ended up paired up with someone, and we were sharing things we tell ourselves that stop us from looking after our own needs. And this guy, he's absolutely awesome. He's worked at the farm for years. He said, "You went to boarding school, didn't you?" And then he lent me Nick Duffel's book, which I thought I would just flick through, but I read the introduction and I read it from cover to cover. And that got me thinking. And then that helped me realise that certain ways I am are not a fixed part of my personality. They're things I adopted to protect myself. And I think it was partly coming on the boarding school concern conference recently made me realise it is important to speak out, because I think I'm probably one of numerous women who, I've never had a mental health problem. I'm not anxious. I've never seen a counsellor until the boarding school stuff came up. But there were things that to me were inexplicable about why certain situations would create an absolute overwhelm in me, and about why I always went, I'm fine. So I think there are a lot of people who think that boarding schools had no impact on them. It has. It must have. And there's things you can do about it to make it better. You know, it's not about complaining, it's about actually saying goodbye to them.
That's very insightful, I think. And, you know, tell me a little bit about the ages you went to school, and you had an early separation, didn't you?
Yeah, so when I was 2, my mum was very ill and was in hospital, and my dad had my 2 older sisters to cope with. And so I went off to my auntie's, quite a long way away, and I was there for months. And there are things about that I know I can remember, because nobody else could have told me. And there's a feeling that I would sometimes get. And I think it's probably something everybody experiences when they start infant school. You know, that feeling of you're a tiny child, you're surrounded by people, and there is nobody there who is a safe attachment. There's, you know, if you cried, nobody would be there to comfort you. And I can still kind of remember times where certain things would go wrong, where that feeling would come up. And I can remember how I perfected the ability to kind of put a shield around myself. And so I think then when I went to boarding school at 10, I think it just compounded that.
Right.
It made me even better at it.
So you'd already started to self-protect even before you got there.
You just go, I'm fine. I'm not going to. And then it became that it wasn't just that I didn't trust anyone to comfort me. I actually started to believe there was no comfort. Nobody could comfort you. You just had to manage it all yourself. Yeah.
That's so interesting, isn't it? So tell me a bit more about your school. What was it like? You mentioned nuns just now, so there was obviously a religious element to it.
So my school was a Roman Catholic convent. It was a very small school. It was certainly not privileged or elite. I mean, I'd say that the only good thing about Roman Catholicism is it's very welcoming of all sorts of people. So there are a lot of Irish families, Italian, very low incomes, and there were some really quite posh girls too. There was only 250 girls in the school. There was only 40 boarders, so there was 8 in my year group. And on the outside, it looked really nice, because it was like it had been a mansion belonging to the Nettlefold family, I think, the N of GKN. And the school building had been built onto that. So there was hall and the boarders' common room on the ground floor, and then chapel and classrooms on the first floor, dormitories on the top, and then a separate block with the juniors, science labs, and the dining room, which we always called the refectory. And then there was this thing called a gym, but it was basically a big hut. And but the grounds were lovely. Had cedar trees, had 2 cedar trees, and it was, once the 3 o'clock bell went and the day girls went home, there was no care. There would just be a nun patrolling. And there wasn't even really rules that, you know, they had God on their side. So the unwritten rule was nothing is allowed. And that meant they didn't get into any quibbles. You couldn't push the rules because they weren't explicit. But if anybody transgressed, it was basically you'd be expelled, you know. So I remember one girl, I think she'd gone to the loo in the middle of the night, and none had encountered her in the corridor and said, "What are you doing out of bed?" And she said, "I'm going to the toilet," and the nun must have said something she didn't like. And this girl said, "You can't do a thing in this fucking place." She was out the next day, you know, no contact with any of us. And two of my very good friends went into town. We knew where the key lived. You know, they went into town, but they didn't get back in time for lights out. So their absence was noted. And they weren't allowed to come and sleep in the dormitory. They were almost sort of quarantined. And their parents were called the next day and they were out. So it was very repressive. And very regimented. You know, we had to go to mass twice a week. We were allowed bath twice a week. We had to put a name on a rota, 15-minute slot. So every dormitory got woken up at some ungodly hour for what was called first call for the girls who had to go to mass that day. So they'd come in, turn the lights on, bash the girls on who were getting up on the feet, open the windows. So the rest of us were then wide awake. And I used to think, this is crazy. It's 2 flights of stairs to get to 9 o'clock assembly. Why do I have to wake up at 6:15 or something? And then in the evening it was silence at 9, lights out at 9:30. And the dormitories, with 8 per dormitory, I think when I started we had a year group dormitories, but they decided we were having too much fun with that. So we were then mixed age groups, which was terrible because you'd be there'd be 2 of you little ones, and the eldest ones were 5 years older than you. So you couldn't get to sleep because after lights out, everybody chatted. And yeah. And I remember just the first night, you know, there was a clock that chimed every 15 minutes in what was called the antechapel. I think I just heard it all night, crying. And then it was breakfast, which was a bit of an ordeal because the Reverend Mother chose to come and sit on our table, but she wouldn't speak. If she wanted something passed, she would just stare at it. And so it was very intimidating. And then I think when it got to class time, I think I was in floods of tears. So my eldest sister was in the upper 6. We overlapped for 1 year. So she was called to try and comfort me. And I think I realised it was absolutely not the thing to do to be seen crying. You know, people didn't know how to deal with it. They were embarrassed. So after that, I never cried in public if I could help it. And you just pretended you were fine all the time.
Were you aware, you know, when you were, I suppose, at home that you were doing this, or did it just become such a way of life?
It became a way of life. And I always thought I got off really lightly because I was a weekly boarder. So on a Friday, I'd have this interminable train journey with usually half an hour on Crewe station. And then on Sunday, I'd have to put my uniform on and set off back and travel through. It was in Birmingham. I'd have to walk up to the town hall, wait at a lonely bus stop, change at 5 ways, wait at a lonely bus stop, get to school. There'd only be like maybe 3 of us coming back on a Sunday night. My mum used to think the nuns would let her know if I didn't arrive. They hadn't a clue. She thought we got supper. We got a bowl of stale crisps left out, you know, and some horrible sliced ham. But and I think my mum went to boarding school when she was quite little, and she was not a comforting. She was anxious. She was down by boarding school, so there was no kind of. You couldn't. My dad. I was always close to my dad. He always took me to the station when he could. He always would stand on the platform and wave. You know, you could lean out of the window.
Yeah.
Then, and you'd wave till somebody completely disappeared from view. But I don't think he had any concept really. And there was one time when I realised you're just on your own, mate. And that was probably the first year that I had to manage without my sister for the travelling. And I got to New Street Station. It was a train strike Friday
Oh my
afternoon.
God.
And there's all those boards where they flick. They were very modern. You know, the
Yeah.
numbers all flipped around. No trains at all. So I'd not experienced anything like it before. So I went to a payphone, phoned home. And of course, the moment you hear your mum's voice, you become a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit tearful. And I can't even remember what she said, but it was just find the next train, which I eventually did, and I eventually did get home. And when I got home, my dad said, "What's this about you phoning up and crying and upsetting your mother?" You know, so you're kind of like, And I had a very best friend at home, my friend Trina, who was also at boarding school. We used to write letters to each other all the time. And I mean, I had lifelines at school. I had the most wonderful best friend who was a day girl, Caroline. She was my guardian angel. Yeah. And yeah.
So tell me a bit more about your lifelines. I mean, that sounds really important that you had something kind of get you through.
I think the lifelines were that the days were better.
Okay.
And I mean, we did have fun in the evenings, the boarders, but the days felt safe. And then my other big lifeline was I started having flute lessons at school.
Okay.
And I really loved playing the flute. And so when after high tea, you know, school would end, then we'd have a spell where we'd always be inventing games to play, mainly physical. And then the nuns would ban them. And then we'd try and find a new game to play. But then we'd have high tea, then we'd have washing up. Then we'd go to supervised study. Did you have that?
Yeah, called prep.
With a nun invigilating. And so after a little bit, I'd go up and say, I need to go and do my flute practice. I was allowed half an hour for flute practice. So I'd just go to an empty classroom with my flute and I'd just play for half an hour. And it was just so grounding. I think looking back on it, it's the breathing as well. And then I'd go back. And then when they swapped over and a new one came invigilating, I'd go up and I'd say, oh, I need to go and do my flute practice. So if I was lucky, I'd get it 12 in the evening. Yeah. And I'd do my homework in the morning when the day got in, because they were better at explaining things than the teachers. And also we were allowed outdoors and the nuns didn't come outdoors really. And in the summer evenings we just played rounders endlessly. And that's a happy memory. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? When you look back, there are sometimes when it was good, and you know, I remember thinking, "Oh gosh," but I can't talk about it being good because you know, I'm saying I was very unhappy there. But there were occasions. I mean, if there weren't, you wouldn't. I don't think you would survive. But it's amazing also how you can. The part of survival is finding those
Yeah,
times.
I think we all coped with it brilliantly. I really do. And but that doesn't mean that it doesn't make you shut down a part of yourself.
Exactly.
And there was one girl in my boarding school year group at the beginning who I think just had a really, really unhappy home life. But she took against me and I almost felt she'd set out to make my life a misery. And it was this kind of unspoken war between us. So I would never let on that she'd upset me. And I'm sure she would spread rumours about me behind my back, you know, because you'd notice people you were really quite close with suddenly being a bit off. But it was an absolute war of wills, and she ended up becoming a day girl. So I always thought, did I win? What happened? You know. And I'd love to meet her again because I'm sure she's absolutely lovely, and I'm sure she was just miserable. And nothing I did enabled us to be friends. I did try. Yeah. Then maybe there was maybe I reminded her of something or someone, I don't know. And there was all that kind of the rites of passage, the putting your teddy bear outside the window on a ledge and making apple pie beds, and you just had to learn to, I'm fine, do what you want, whatever. It's not going to bother me.
Your teddy bear.
Yeah, which is a sign of boarding school, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you see it.
Can you show him to us?
Yeah. And I could never quite, and he's very worn out. And he did have to get repaired a few times. And I've had him since I was 2. And I could never quite understand why my children didn't seem to care about their teddy bears. I was thinking, what's wrong with them? And then I realised, actually, that's brilliant. They don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah, I've still got my teddy bear. He sits up. I mean, lost a lot of bulk in his legs and things, isn't it? Yeah, it hasn't really occurred to me, but you're right. Yes, I've still got my teddy bear. Isn't that funny?
And where does he live?
Where he just lives. Just sits on a shelf and, always has.
Yeah. And he was your constant companion, and he travelled overseas with you.
Yeah.
And what age did you get him?
I must have been very young, because there's a picture of me as a toddler clutching him.
Oh, yeah. And has he got a name?
Nope. Oh. I hadn't actually thought about that until you got your teddy out and talked about how your children aren't attached to their teddies. And I thought, yes, you've got something there. Yeah. Interesting.
It is a huge comfort. It's a huge comfort, isn't it?
Yeah. So you left school at age 15, was it?
Yeah, so I
left that school? Or...
Yeah, I think my mum felt she had to send me and my 2 sisters to convent schools because she was brought up quite strict Roman Catholic. Strangely enough, my younger brother never went to a convent school and never had to go to church, which seems to me an appalling double standard. And so I went to a really lovely normal state primary school. And boys and girls, happy memories of that. Though, a few of those little moments of overwhelm, I think, that I was talking about earlier, where I wouldn't be able to speak. There was one time when we were allowed, in one year group, we were allowed to take, if it had been our birthday, we were allowed to take in our favourite present. And my birthday is on Christmas Day. So I took in my favourite present. And the teacher just looked at me and said, "Don't be stupid, we don't bring in Christmas presents." And I was old enough that I could have said, yeah, but it was my birthday. But I was never, ever, ever able to do that because that feeling would immediately come. And I knew that I had lost the power of speech and I just had to keep it all held together or I would collapse. And but apart from things like that, infant school was great. And then I went, so my kind of exposure to the religious stuff started at 7 when I went to a day convent. And I am going to get to what happened when I left. But that was my first exposure to religious education. And I just remember being completely, just thinking it just wasn't right. I can remember putting my hand up saying, we do religious stuff in the morning, we learn about Adam and Eve. In the afternoon, we're learning about Stone Age. How do they fit together in the timeline? And the reaction of the teacher was very interesting. She didn't answer, she just looked very, very angry and shut it down. And then I remember being taught about the Holy Innocents, all the little babies that Herod had murdered. the firstborn boys. And they told us in no uncertain terms that these babies hadn't gone to heaven because they hadn't been baptized.
Oh, gosh.
So they were in purgatory forever. And I can remember thinking, God would never do that. That is wrong. And, gradually, but I just kept thinking, they've made all this up. And then I remember we had these little workbooks and we had to learn what was a venial sin, which is a little sin, and what was a mortal sin, which is automatic hell.
Oh, my word.
We had to colour in the venial sins orange and the mortal sins purple. And I said, how many venial sins adds up to a mortal sin? And they said, that never happened. So you could have an infinite number of venial sins, but it would never equal a mortal sin. But in the purple ones was missing Mass one Sunday. Okay? I was, you are so making this up. And I think it gave me a very strong sense of defiance around the kind of cult-like, you've got to be obedient. And I did have very good friends when I was about 19, 20 who did get sucked into a cult. And I always want to know where my escape route is. Where's the door? And so then I had the boarding school convent. So when I was 15, so we'd just done our O-levels. And I think, some of our year group had been expelled, some had left. I think the nuns were struggling a bit. I think the kind of complete lack of pastoral care at that school was becoming really, really apparent. And I think they made it clear they didn't want any of our boarding group to go on. I was certainly regarded as, whenever we did get into trouble, they always thought it was me that was the ringleader, even though it usually wasn't. It was usually my friend Susanna. And very early on, I remember the Reverend Mother making us all sit in the hall in silence. And she pretended she had a desk in the middle of the hall. It was empty, just the boarders. She sat there pretending she hadn't noticed us come in. And for about what seemed like about an hour, it was probably 5 minutes. But and then she, one by one, she called us all up and character assassinated us. Each one of the 40 of them. And me, it was, she said, "You're insolent." I didn't even know what insolent meant. So I think I was just done with the place. And so thankfully, maybe my dad won out. I was allowed to go to a big sixth form in a direct grant school that wasn't religious. It was Cheadle Hume School. And it just felt to me like my life started. I remember the feeling when my last O-level was French. And I wasn't very good at French, so I finished it about 3/4 of an hour early. I walked out of that exam, down the stairs, picked up my little suitcase. I walked out the school, middle of the day. I walked down the road to the bus stop. I was lighter than air. I was that feeling. And looking back on it, I used to feel that a lot when I was a junior school girl. I'd just get that happy, excited feeling, random times, odd days. And I didn't really get that feeling when I was at school, only like at the beginning of the summer holidays, leaving at the beginning of the summer holidays. And I went to Cheadle Hume. I had to hide how surprised I was at everything for about the first term. It was just a revelation. It was partly the co-ed nature. So, and it was big, there was as many in my lower six as there were in the whole of my convent. And so there was masses of opportunities to find the friends you liked doing homework with, the friends you liked doing sports with, the friends you liked going out with, the friends you liked mucking about with. And just the free and easy relationship between the girls and the boys was fantastic, because they'd all known each other since they were tiny. And it was just brilliant, and it made me realise that my kind of exposure to the opposite gender had really been, up until then, had been through the tennis club, which was mainly boys who were at public schools coming home in the holidays. And just the automatic inbuilt misogyny and entitlement in the whole way they were was such a contrast to these lads at Cheadle. And then at the end of the first term there, we had exams, and the results went up on the notice board, and you could have knocked me down with a feather, because I suddenly realised that I had automatically assumed that 1 to 20 would be the boys, 21 to 40 would be the girls. Where did I get that idea? And of course, it was completely intermingled.
Yeah, yeah.
Where did I get that idea? Yeah. And I had a big music department. We could do whatever sports we liked. Oh, it just felt like my life began.
I totally relate to that. I mean, I didn't get to leave until after sixth form, but I remember, starting at medical school and feeling like, there's a world out there where I actually belong. It felt so extravagant and wonderful just to be able to relate to people on a one-to-one level. Yes, boys, goodness me, these magnificent creatures who I really didn't come across apart from my brother.
Yeah, and they're very funny, and they have a lovely energy about them. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm glad you got through that. And then what? So
I think,
I mean, you were academically successful.
Yeah, so home, I think I had, a solid family. But, my mum was not someone who ever played with us or was cuddly. She showed her love by kind of cooking and cleaning and sewing. And I just wanted decent exam results so I could be free, really. So, and I mean, I do have my mum to thank in that because the teaching at the convent was not good, really not good. And I never did very well in term time exams. And they used to read out the exam results in assembly. People had to line up in the order. And the other thing I remember about assembly is they used to hand out, I don't know if it was every week or every month, probably every week, these little award badges that you were supposed to want. And they were a little enamel badge. And they either had P or C or D. Any guesses?
I don't think I want to guess.
They weren't great. They were just different attributes you were supposed to aspire to. So P was punctuality.
Okay.
So if you'd been very punctual, you got one. C was conduct, so very good conduct. And D was deportment.
Oh, wow. Oh, my word.
I never, even though I think they were handed out weekly, I never in my entire 5 years ever got one of them. But what my mother did, which was fantastically helpful, was when it was O levels, she got the syllabuses. You can get the syllabus from the exam board, and she was like, "Here you are. That's what you need to do to get through the exams." And I realised a lot of what our teaching didn't quite match the syllabus, and so I just kind of focused on pure exam technique and making sure I'd learnt what I needed to learn, and got really good O-levels, so got a place at Hume, sailed through A-levels, went straight to med school, and had quite a wild time, really. And I think I was a bit wary of female friendships. I think I trusted lads more by then. And I think, I don't know what you found, but there's a lot of shaming you at med school, isn't there? It's a lot of
a huge amount.
people out. And I almost felt I was very well prepared for that.
Yes, you're right.
Water the duck's back, you know.
We were used to being shamed. So it didn't feel, it's only in retrospect that I can identify it. At the time, I just accepted it.
Yeah.
You know, and if you asked a question, then that was often considered stupid because you were only supposed to supply answers. So it was just, oh, what a bizarre way of trying to teach people. So you went through most of your life, and you managed to convince yourself that it was all in the past.
Just never thought about it. Never thought about it. Yeah.
Never thought about it. You left it behind.
School again. It was a bolt from the blue when I got that invite. Sharon and Anne saying we're having a gathering at the school, because I'd literally never gone back to school in my mind. From that moment I walked down the road feeling lighter than air. You know, I kept up with Caroline, my best friend, and so it was surprised me when Rich lent me that book, and I started thinking about it, and then I started thinking, oh yeah. And it's very hard to explain and pin down the patterns that it leaves you with. And I think for me, the main one was to do with the wider family I married into. I was so used to, you know, never seeking comfort and always being fine and always being the one who looked after others, that I did sometimes feel that was taken for granted, you know. And there'd be times where inside I'd be saying, how dare you do that? But on the outside I'd be going, no, I'm fine. And so it would manifest as kind of internal anger and resentment. Why am I babysitting all these children again? Why does Will's younger brother think he can always just arrive and take Will out to the pub and never include me? Why do they have gatherings where they don't include the brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law? And I had no repertoire at all for actually saying this isn't all right, this doesn't feel all right. Just didn't have a language for it, didn't know how to do it. And I think there was one little moment when my lovely nephew, who's married a wonderful girl from Japan, and I think they'd had a registry office wedding, but they wanted a blessing in a little church, and they wanted a Japanese ceremony as well. And for the little church wedding blessing, so it wasn't actually a wedding, but it was like a wedding, they'd asked if I would play my flute. And so we were there the day before, and I was busy helping with the floral arrangements. It was very DIY. And I was like, I remember saying to Jo, my sister-in-law, she's the mum of the nephew, you know, what's happening about going to the church? And she said, oh, well, just the family are going to the church. We're going to have a little rehearsal. And so I just didn't think twice. I didn't say, don't you think maybe I should come? So at least I know the space and I know when I'm going to play and stuff. So I did feel a little bit left out, but I didn't say or do anything. And then, so the next day, I said, I'm just going to go to the church 15 minutes early. And I walked in, and it was a terrible experience because just that whole church thing. And there was this chap there who I'd encountered before who I really found quite difficult. And I didn't like him, and he said something stupid. And I got my flute out, and I realised there was no way I'd be able to control my breathing and play. Mm. And it was terrible. It was awful. And luckily what happened was the vicar arrived, and she was this absolutely gorgeous woman. And she had with her I don't know what you call them, the rector or whatever, who was another gorgeous woman who was a flautist. And they looked at me and they could immediately see how distressed I was and that I was kind of beyond speech. And they just scooped me up and took me to a little, where they get changed. Said, here's music stand. You've got loads of time. Just have some quiet time to yourself, sort yourself out. And they rescued me. And so I did manage to play. I mean, it wasn't as strong as I would have liked it to have been. But the next day, with Jo, my sister-in-law, I did explain, and she was absolutely brilliant about it. Mm. She was like, so sorry. And we had to go cry. And, I think that was just flashbacks to boarding school.
Yeah.
It's a combination. It was the being excluded. So being excluded is a real trigger point for me.
Yeah.
So often it's unintentional.
Yeah.
You're in a big family group. Somebody's said, why don't we go to the pub at 6? Everybody else knows. You haven't checked who knows. But if I'm the only one who doesn't know, I'm like a complete mess. And your own little space, you need your pets, you need people not to take your stuff. So then went on the workshops.
Yeah.
Because that was another thing that happened at a big family occasion. I had another real overwhelm meltdown. Hardly anybody knew apart from my lovely daughter-in-law. And I felt so bad because it kind of slightly marred the day for her. I was like, I've got to sort this out. So applied to go on the workshops. And they're really helpful because I think what I really loved was they reconnect you, with who you were before you went. That happy child who was completely open and friendly with everyone. I'm in junior school. I could say when I was upset. I could. I had so many friends I used to go to their houses, and I felt happy most of the time. And they say we take you back to school so that you can leave it behind. I found them really, really helpful.
Good. So, I mean, it's good, isn't it, to know that even though these things can affect us so very deeply, that there is possibility of growing somehow through it and changing and recovering, whatever that means for each individual person.
Absolutely, and that's why I think it's important to speak about it, because normally I would run a mile from talking about myself, but I just feel there must be so many people who they've shut away the boarding school experience. They've never realised it shut down a part of themselves. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't mean we're complaining or saying poor little me at all. It just means we're saying those patterns that helped you survive and weren't you brilliant for surviving, you can let go of them now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Angela. I mean, this has been such a brilliant conversation. You're clearly someone who's very insightful, who's thought about these things very deeply, and I'm sure it will help other people to hear your story. And it's a story of hope. I think that is something we can give. And I'm really happy that you came to this conversation, and look forward to hearing it get out there. So
thank you, and it's so easy talking to you, Cathy. It's wonderful. Yeah, and I mean, it's important not just for me, but I think probably I'm easier for my family to cope with now as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Cathy.
Thank you.